What if I told you that the man most famous for the first voyage around the world never actually made it around the world? Today we often call it Magellan's circumnavigation, as if Ferdinand Magellan sailed from Spain, crossed the oceans, circled the globe, and returned home in triumph. But that is not what happened. Magellan never came back. He died halfway through the journey. And the man who finally brought the last surviving ship back to Spain was someone far less famous, Juan Sebastián Elcano. So here is the question. Why is one of the greatest voyages in history named after a man who did not finish it? And how did a mission that began with 5 ships and around 270 men end with only 1 broken vessel and 18 survivors? This is the story of the first voyage around the world. Part 1. A plan that sounded almost impossible. The year was 1519. At that time, spices from Asia were among the most valuable goods in Europe. Pepper, cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg were not just cooking ingredients. They were luxury products, symbols of wealth, and sources of enormous profit. Whoever controlled the route to the Spice Islands controlled a fortune. But there was a problem. The eastern sea routes around Africa were largely controlled by Portugal. Spain needed another way to reach Asia. And that was when Ferdinand Magellan stepped forward. Magellan was Portuguese by birth, but after failing to win support from the Portuguese crown, he turned to Spain. He offered the Spanish king, Charles I, a bold idea: sail west from Spain, find a passage through the southern edge of the Americas, cross the unknown ocean beyond it, and reach the Spice Islands from the other side. It was ambitious, it was dangerous, and to many people, it probably sounded insane. But Spain accepted. On September 20th, 1519, 5 ships left Spain: the Trinidad, the San Antonio, the Concepcion, the Victoria, and the Santiago. There were about 270 men on board. They thought they were sailing toward wealth and glory. Instead, they were sailing into one of the most brutal survival stories in maritime history. Part 2, the voyage begins to fall apart. From the beginning, the expedition was full of tension. Magellan was the commander, but many of the Spanish officers did not trust him. After all, he was Portuguese, leading a Spanish mission. That alone created suspicion. As the fleet sailed down the coast of South America, the weather grew colder. Supplies became more limited. The men became more frightened. They were searching for a passage that no one on board had ever seen. What if it did not exist? In 1520, the ship stopped at a cold and isolated harbor in southern South America called Port St. Julian. There, the tension finally exploded. A mutiny broke out. Several captains turned against Magellan, believing that continuing south was madness. They wanted to end the journey before everyone died, but Magellan refused to give up. He crushed the mutiny with force. Some rebels were executed, others were abandoned. This moment showed what kind of leader Magellan was. He was brave and visionary, but also harsh and uncompromising. Even after the mutiny was suppressed, disaster continued. The Santiago was wrecked while scouting the coast. 5 ships had left Spain. Now only 4 remained. And still, the great passage to the other ocean had not been found. Part 3. The passage is found, but hope does not last. Then, in October 1520, everything changed. Magellan finally found the passage. It was a narrow, dangerous waterway at the southern end of South America. Today, we know it as the Strait of Magellan. This was a huge breakthrough. For the first time, the expedition had proof that Magellan's idea was not just a dream. There really was a way through the Americas into another ocean. But the victory came at a cost. While the fleet was passing through the strait, the San Antonio deserted and sailed back to Spain. Now only 3 ships entered the ocean beyond. When Magellan saw the calm waters, he named it the Pacific Ocean, meaning peaceful. But the name was almost cruel, because the Pacific was far larger than anyone on the expedition understood. They had no accurate map. They did not know how far they still had to go. and their food was running out. For months, the men crossed open water without seeing land. The biscuits became rotten. The drinking water turned foul. The men grew weak from hunger and disease. Many suffered from scurvy. They had found the passage, but now they were trapped in an ocean that seemed endless. The voyage was no longer about glory, it was about survival. Part 4. The biggest twist. Magellan dies. Finally, in March 1521, the fleet reached the Philippines. After months of starvation and fear, land must have felt like a miracle. Magellan became involved in local politics and conflict. He tried to support one local ruler and display Spanish power in the region. On April 27, 1521, Magellan and his men fought in the Battle of Mactan against the forces of a local leader named Lapu-Lapu. Magellan was killed. Magellan was killed. The man who had imagined the route, the man who had led the fleet across the Atlantic, the man who had found the passage into the Pacific, never completed the voyage. That is the central irony of this story. The expedition remembered as Magellan's voyage around the world was not finished by Magellan. He opened the door, but someone else had to survive long enough to walk through it. That is the central irony of this story. The expedition remembered as Magellan's voyage around the world was not finished by Magellan. He opened the door, but someone else had to survive long enough to walk through it. Part 5. The forgotten man who finished the journey. After Magellan's death, the surviving crew had to keep going. By this point, there were not enough men left to operate all the ships. One vessel was burned. Eventually, only the Victoria continued westward toward home. The man who led the final stage of the journey was Juan Sebastián Elcano. Elcano had not begun the expedition as its hero, but history sometimes changes its main character halfway through the story. Under Elcano's command, the Victoria crossed the Indian Ocean, rounded the southern tip of Africa, and struggled back towards Spain. The men faced hunger, storms, enemy ships, and exhaustion. But on September 6, 1522, the Victoria finally returned to Spain. The ship was battered. The crew was nearly destroyed. But they had done something no one had ever done before. About 270 men had set out in 1519. Only 18 completed the full journey around the world. One ship returned, and with it came proof that the world could be circled by sea. Conclusion: what this voyage really changed. The first circumnavigation changed history because it proved through action that the oceans were connected and that the earth could be sailed around. It changed maps. It changed trade. It changed how Europeans understood the size of the world. But the human story is even more powerful. This was not a simple story of one great hero returning in glory. It was a story of ambition, fear, hunger, rebellion, death, and survival. Magellan began the voyage, but he did not finish it. Elcano finished the voyage, but his name is often forgotten. And maybe that is what makes this story so fascinating. Sometimes history remembers the person who starts the journey, but the world is changed by the people who endure long enough to finish it. So the next time you hear the phrase Magellan's circumnavigation, remember the truth. Magellan found the way into the Pacific. But it was Elcano and 17 other survivors who brought the answer home.